The evening started as usual. My wife Rachel and I arrived at Mark's house feeling a little excited about the upcoming meeting. It was one of those parties he threw once a month, gathering friends and acquaintances under the roof of his luxurious country house. Rachel looked amazing. Her white dress, tightly fitting her slender figure, seemed to attract the gazes of men. She has always been able to make an impression, and today was no exception. I couldn't help but notice how her eyes sparkled with a special sparkle when she smiled at others. She was in her element. Mark, the host of the evening, came up to us with a big smile. He always knew how to attract attention. His charisma always made you feel special in his company. Tall, with a well-built figure and confident eyes, he possessed a magnetism that was hard to resist. We had known each other for a long time, and I knew his habits, but today there was something different in his manner. "It's like he's up to something." "It's great that you came," Mark said, lightly touching Rachel's shoulder. His gesture looked casual, but there was a certain excessive intimacy in it that did not escape my attention. Rachel laughed lightly, and her laughter rang out in the room, drawing the eyes of the other guests to us. I felt something inside me tense up. Maybe it was just my imagination, but Mark and Rachel exchanged a brief glance, which seemed strange to me. I tried to banish disturbing thoughts from myself, blaming everything on the situation and its atmosphere. Soon the guests were seated in the living room, filling it with the noise of conversation and laughter. Mark took over the role of host, as always controlling the course of the evening. He was a master at creating an atmosphere, light, relaxing, but at the same time saturated with hidden energy that it was impossible not to feel. When the conversation started to die down, Mark suggested a game. It was one of those casual pastimes that he often came up with at his parties. The game was supposed to keep the guests interested, engage them in communication, and, as it seemed, remain on the verge of innocent flirtation. But this time I felt something strange. There was something hidden in his offer that I couldn't immediately grasp. "Let's play a little game," he said, and his voice sounded soft, almost casual. "Nothing complicated, just a little fun." The guests were happy to take up the idea. No one wanted to break the atmosphere, and besides, Mark has always been known for his original and funny ideas. I smiled tightly, but something inside me tightened. The game started with simple questions and easy tasks. But soon the tone changed. Mark made the next offer with the same nonchalance, but I noticed his gaze settle on Rachel. "Rachel, why don't you sit on my lap?" he said with a smile. The room froze for a moment. I felt something tighten in my chest. All eyes were on her, but her face remained unreadable. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze sliding over my face as if seeking permission or support, but I didn't have time to say anything. With a slight smile, she took a step forward and, as if this was the most natural action in the world, sat on Mark's lap. There was a tense silence in the room, but it was soon broken by general laughter. One of the guests made a joke, and it diffused the situation. However, this was the first alarm call for me. I saw Mark put his arm around Rachel's waist, and she leaned a little closer to him. It was too intimate, too close. The game continued. With each new assignment, the tone became more provocative, and I noticed how Rachel was starting to behave differently than usual. Her smile became more playful, her movements became more free. She stopped being shy and began to take part in the game with a boldness that I had not seen in her before. Mark seemed fascinated by her behavior. I watched as his hand, seemingly by accident, touched her thigh, as his gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. I wanted to say something, to intervene, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, and the situation got out of control. At some point, when another assignment required Rachel to do something that, by my standards, was out of bounds, she looked back at me. Her eyes shone with a strange gleam, in which excitement and excitement were mixed. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer stay away. I was on the verge of intervening, but something inside me held me back, as if I was bound by invisible bonds. The night was just beginning, but it was already clear that it would not be an ordinary one. There was more than just a game ahead of me, something that could change everything. But so far I didn't know how far this game would go, and what consequences it would bring for Rachel and me. I watched her every move, feeling a strange mixture of jealousy, fear, and an incomprehensible premonition grow inside me. The game continued, the evening reached its climax. The atmosphere in the room was heating up by the minute, and the tension that I had felt from the very beginning was now almost unbearable. The Rachel I knew seemed to have disappeared, giving way to a woman I could barely recognize. She was the center of attention, her movements were confident, and her eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and something else that I couldn't pinpoint. She was under the power of this game, and I felt that she was willing to go to great lengths not to get out of it. Mark, as an experienced conductor, directed everything that was happening. His voice sounded restrained but confident, and every word he said carried a hidden meaning. He suggested the next task, and it immediately threw me off balance. "Rachel," he began, looking at her with the same confident smile, "kiss John." He nodded towards one of the guests, a tall, dark-haired man with a smirk on his face. The room froze. All eyes were on Rachel, waiting for her reaction. I saw her tense up internally, but her face remained impenetrable. She held her breath for a split second, her eyes darted in my direction, as if seeking confirmation or support, but I stood paralyzed, unable to say or do anything. Rachel took a step forward, her movements slow and determined. I saw her approach John. Her breathing became rapid, and her face turned slightly pale. She stopped in front of him, her hands trembling, but she raised her head and looked him straight in the eyes. For a moment there was a deathly silence in the room. She leaned forward slowly and their lips touched. The kiss was long, too long. It wasn't just a touch of the lips, it was an act saturated with passion and provocation. John put his hands on her waist, pulling her closer, and I saw Rachel, frozen for a moment, succumb to this movement. Their kiss deepened, and I felt something inside me tearing apart. The room seemed to explode when the other guests started applauding and laughing, but I couldn't share their fun. When Rachel pulled away, her face was tense, but the same strange fire was still burning in her eyes. She quickly returned to her seat, but I could see that this act had changed her. Mark seemed pleased with her reaction, and there was a hint of satisfaction in his smile. But he wasn't going to stop there. "Great, Rachel," he said with a slight grin. "Now let's do something bolder. How about taking off your blouse?" At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just a task, it was a step towards breaking down all barriers, and I knew that if Rachel agreed, there would be no turning back. Rachel froze for a moment, her eyes meeting mine again. I saw her struggling with herself, trying to make a decision. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she didn't back down. As if in slow motion, she slowly reached for the buttons on her blouse. The first button unfastened, then the second. Every move she made was like a blow to my heart. She was unbuttoning button after button, and I could see her breathing quicken, her cheeks turn red. Finally, the last button was undone, and the blouse slid gently over her shoulders, revealing a lace bra. She stood in front of everyone, slightly hunched over, but with her head up, her face expressing a mixture of embarrassment and determination. The room was filled with cheers again, but I felt that something was wrong. Rachel took a step towards the point of no return, and I didn't know what to do next. Mark smiled again, and I knew he was going to continue. "Excellent, Rachel," he said with a note of admiration in his voice. "And now, to really add spice, kiss John again, but this time more passionately." Rachel didn't move. I saw her face turn pale, but the same strange determination still burned in her eyes. She understood that this was no longer just a game. It was more than that, and she seemed ready to go all the way. She slowly approached John again. This time, her movements were less confident, but still determined. She stopped in front of him, and he pulled her back to him, this time more confidently. Their kiss was deep, almost rough, and I felt everything inside me turn over. When the kiss was over, Rachel returned to her seat, her face tense and her hands shaking. She did something she didn't intend to do, and I knew she probably didn't fully understand why herself. But Mark seemed pleased with her action. He looked at her with approval, and I felt like there was some kind of strange connection between them. As the evening drew to a close, I could see that Rachel was still under the impression of what had happened. Her eyes were full of emotions that she was trying to hide, but I knew there was a storm raging inside her. We left Mark's house, and I felt like something important had disappeared from our lives. That night was the point of no return, and I didn't know what was waiting for us next. We left Mark's house late at night. The party was over, but there was still that tension in the air that had been born a few hours ago. We drove home in complete silence, and the silence was deafening. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know how to approach what had happened. Rachel was sitting next to me, her face tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see how her hands were shaking, how she was clenching them into fists, trying to maintain at least a semblance of calm. When we got home, she silently got out of the car and headed into the house. I followed her, feeling the weight of what had happened weigh on me, how hard it was to breathe. I wanted to talk to her, I wanted to ask her how she felt, but the words stuck in my throat. "Rachel." I started, but she didn't turn around. She silently went into the bedroom, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stood there feeling completely helpless. It was like in a nightmare where you're trying to do something, but your body won't listen. I went into the bedroom and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed with her head down. Her hair fell over her shoulders, and I couldn't see her face. There was a tense silence in the room, broken only by our breathing. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, trying to stay calm, even though everything was boiling inside. She raised her head, her eyes were full of tears, but she held them back, trying not to betray her feelings. Her voice was low, but there was bitterness in it. "About what happened. About what I did." I didn't know what to say. This was the moment when all the words seemed meaningless. I came closer and sat down next to her on the bed, but she pulled away, as if there was a wall between us that I couldn't overcome. "Rachel, I don't understand what's going on with you," I said, trying to be honest. "You acted like it wasn't you." She turned abruptly to me, her eyes sparkling with suppressed emotions. "Do you think it was easy for me? Do you think that's what I wanted?" Her words hit me like a fist in the stomach. I didn't know what to say. Everything I wanted to say didn't seem to make sense. "Why didn't you stop me?" she asked, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. I wanted to explain that I didn't know what to do, that I was paralyzed by fear and bewilderment, but the words wouldn't come. I was just silent, and the silence was deafening. Rachel stood up and began to pace the room nervously, her hands clenching and unclenching. I could see a storm of emotions raging inside her that she couldn't put into words. "Mark," she began, but couldn't finish. I knew what she wanted to say, but I was afraid to hear it. Mark was the reason for all this. He was the one who directed her actions, who pushed her to what happened. "Rachel, I do not know what to say," I confessed, feeling the pain growing in my chest. "I do not know how we can fix this." She stopped, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. There was fear mixed with despair in her eyes. "I don't know myself," she finally said softly. "But I know one thing, I can't live like this anymore." These words were like a sentence. I felt like an insurmountable wall had really grown up between us. She went to the window, looking out into the night, as if trying to find answers to her questions in the dark. At that moment, the door to the bedroom suddenly opened, and Mark stood on the threshold. His appearance was so sudden that I did not immediately understand what was happening. He was calm, his face showed no emotion, but there was the same hidden fire in his eyes that I saw at the party. "Mark, what are you doing here?" I asked, getting out of bed. Anger boiled up inside me, but I held it back, trying to figure out what was going on. "I came to talk," he replied coldly, his gaze directed at Rachel. She turned to him sharply, her face turned pale, and I saw her clenching her fists. "What should I talk about?" Her voice was taut as a string. Mark took a step forward, his voice quieter, but there was steel in it. "Rachel, you know what I'm talking about. It's not over yet." I didn't understand what was going on, but deep down I felt it was related to what happened at the party. Mark has been manipulating us all this time, but now he has come to take the last step. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark turned to me, his gaze full of contempt. "I need what Rachel has already started. She took the first step, and now she has to finish." I felt like everything inside me turned upside down. It was an ultimatum. Mark wanted Rachel to completely submit to his will. Everything that happened at the party was just the beginning. "Rachel," he said without taking his eyes off her, "you know what you need to do. You've already started this game, and now you need to finish it." Rachel stood as if paralyzed. I saw her face turn even paler, and her hands trembled. She knew that if she retreated now, there would be no turning back. But I could see that she was on the edge, that she didn't know what to do. "Rachel, you don't have to do this," I said, taking a step toward her. But she pulled away, Her eyes filled with horror. Mark kept pushing her. "You've already gone too deep to stop. You know it's the right thing to do." At that moment, I realized that I had to do something. This was the moment when it was necessary to act to save Rachel, to bring her back. I took a step forward, ready to step between them, but Rachel suddenly raised her hand, stopping me. "Don't, John," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's my choice." I froze in disbelief. She was going to take this step herself. She was ready to go all the way. Mark came closer, his hands on her shoulders. I saw her close her eyes, trying to cope with the inner storm. Mark leaned over and whispered something in her ear, and I saw her face contort with inner pain. And suddenly she abruptly opened her eyes and looked at me. There was something new in her gaze, something I hadn't seen before. It was the look of a man who had made a decision, but it was a bitter decision. "John," she began, but her voice was shaking. She didn't have time to finish. At that moment, Mark abruptly pulled away from her, as if he understood something. His face turned pale. She refused to play by Mark's rules, refused to obey his will. I saw in her eyes the determination that seemed to have been lost in the course of this terrible game. Mark, noticing the change in her behavior, took a step back. He was no longer the confident man who had been playing this game from the beginning. Now he looked confused, as if he didn't understand how things had turned out this way. His face contorted with the sudden realization that he had lost control. "What are you doing, Rachel?" he hissed, his voice shaking. "You can't just stop like that." Rachel looked at me again, her gaze full of a calmness I hadn't seen in her in a long time. She took another step towards me, and I felt my heart lighten. She chose me, chose our marriage, despite everything that happened. "No, Mark, this is the end," she said softly but firmly. "I won't play your games anymore." I saw Mark clench his fists, his face turned red with rage. He couldn't believe that everything was collapsing right in front of his eyes, that his plan had failed. But he couldn't do anything anymore. He had lost his power over Rachel. "You can't do this," he shouted, but there was desperation in his voice. "You've already gone too far." "It was a mistake," Rachel replied, not taking her eyes off him. "But I won't let you destroy everything I have." I saw Mark slowly lower his arms, his shoulders hunched, as if he had finally realized his defeat. He stared at us in silence, his eyes filled with hatred, but he couldn't say anything more. "Go away, Mark," I said, stepping forward and putting myself between him and Rachel. For a moment, I thought he was going to object, but then his face changed again. He looked at me with the same contempt that I had seen at the party, but there was no longer the power in his gaze that he had possessed before. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice low and ominous, but no longer confident. Mark turned around and left the room, leaving us in tense silence. When the door closed behind him, I turned to Rachel. She stood with her head down, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotions. "Rachel," I began, but I didn't know what to say. She looked up at me, and I saw tears running down her cheeks. "John, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I do not know how we were able to get this far." I came closer and hugged her, feeling the tension inside me gradually go away. She rested her head on my chest, and I could hear her breathing getting calmer. "We'll manage," I said, feeling a new hope ignite inside me. Rachel didn't answer, but I knew she understood. We stood there for a few minutes, feeling the silence around us become less oppressive, as her heart beats in time with mine. At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just a battle with Mark, it was a battle for us, for our future. Rachel had made her choice, and now I knew that we could handle any difficulties. This evening, despite everything that happened, was the beginning of something new. Mark could no longer control our lives. We had regained what we had lost, and now we had a chance to start all over again, without his shadow that overshadowed our existence. When we finally moved away from each other, I looked into Rachel's eyes and saw there the woman I once loved. She was strong, but vulnerable, and now I knew that together we could overcome everything. We left the room, leaving all our fears and doubts behind. This evening changed us, but it also gave us strength that we didn't know we could find in ourselves. Mark has passed away from our lives, but his influence has left a deep mark. We knew there was a lot of work ahead of us, but we were ready for it. And that was our victory. We came out of the darkness, holding on to what was really important to us. And this was the beginning of a new stage in our lives, a life that we decided to live together, no matter what.